Please get out your scriptures. If you've got the actually written word or printed word, go ahead and take it out and turn to Titus chapter 3, the very end of the little book, beginning with verse 12. If you have your phone, your iPad, whatever device you happen to be using, go ahead and get it out so you can follow along. And I will read our text this morning, Titus chapter 3, beginning with verse 12. When I send Artemas or Tychicus to you, make every effort to come to me at Nicopolis, for I have decided to spend the winter there. Diligently help Zenas the lawyer and Apollos on their way so that nothing is lacking for them. Our people must also learn to engage in good deeds, to meet pressing needs, so that they will not be unfruitful. All who are with me greet you. Greet those who love us in the faith. Grace be with you all. My family has been watching a cable series lately, and it's about an English football team. I won't tell you what the series is because it has probably, anyway, I can't recommend it because of the language in it, but the storyline is an interesting storyline. In the beginning of the first season, we meet one of the people involved with this football team, that is real football that you play with your feet. We call it soccer, but everywhere else in the world they call it football. And so in the beginning of the first season, we meet a humble, soft-spoken, timid locker room attendant who is just picked on and mistreated by the players. It's really awful to watch, sad to watch. But the coach, the head coach of this team, who happens to be an American, sees that this attendant has more than meets the eye. And he recognizes that he's really attentive to what's going on, and every once in a while shares keen insights into the players or what's going on out on the field. And so to the team's surprise, during the first season, the head coach promotes this humble locker room attendant to assistant coach, to be one of the assistant coaches. And so that's the first season. Then in the second season, we see how this soft-spoken, timid, now assistant coach comes into his own. And at one point toward the end of in one of the episodes, towards the end of a critical match, it was a semifinal match that was just very important for the team. And each of the teams on the field have one goal. And he is watching as his team, the players are yelling at each other, there's confusion, and he just knows they're gonna lose this if something doesn't happen. And so he's standing with the other coaches on the sideline. And as he watches the team unraveling, it's so interesting because you can see him struggling internally to overcome his timidity and his self-doubt. And finally, he spits, which is kind of his way of girding his loins, if you will. He spits and he starts yelling instructions to the players. And they're all shocked. But they start listening to him, and they do exactly what he says, and lo and behold, they score the winning goal, and the final seconds of the game are over, and they're all celebrating their win in this important match. And so what made the difference in the game? What made the difference in the game? And what made the difference in this game was for this coach, this assistant coach, to get into the game, right? He had to get into the game. He had to get outside of himself and his fears and use what he had to help the team. And so that's what we want to be thinking about as we look at these concluding verses to Paul's letter to Titus. We find ourselves in a team, if you will, engaged in a critical endeavor that is vastly greater. I mean, there's no comparison in terms of importance between the game, and I'll put that in quotes, that we're involved in, and the game that is being played on the field, even the World Cup. And we find ourselves, by virtue of our faith in Messiah, as hand-picked recruits God's hand-picked recruits for his team. He calls it the church, the body of believers, the called out ones. And he has purified for himself a people who are to be zealous for good works. And what's the good work? What's the prime directive, if you will, that we have been given by the Messiah? That is to go into all the world and make disciples. That is to share the good news of the light of the world in a world that is growing ever darker spiritually. And that's what we're involved in. And so that's the metaphor that I want you to keep in mind as we look at our text this morning. And so as we come to the end of Paul's letter to Titus, we're reminded of this very thing, that we are involved in this great match, if you will. In the brief and somewhat abrupt conclusion of his letter, Paul packs 4 imperatives, 4 commands into this text. And each one, there's one in each of the verses. And this is what they are. Make every effort to come, diligently help, must learn, and finally greet. And although all of these commands are directed to Titus, they point us to the great work in which we are involved, that is the work of bringing the light of the world to a darkening world around us. And so as we look at our text this morning, I want us to ask and answer the question, what does it take to make an impact in the task of sharing Yeshua, the light of the world, with our darkening world? What does it take? And this is what it takes. Get in the game. Get in the game. All of us, by virtue of God's gifting, if we know Messiah and have his Holy Spirit, each of us has gifts, each of us has abilities that are absolutely essential to the building up of Messiah's body, to the adding to Messiah's body, to seeing more people find out how great God is and how amazing salvation is and how wonderful it is to know that the world is going to get straightened out and we're going to get to enjoy it. And we're part of that. And so we want to, as we look at our text, I want to reinforce this idea that for us to make an impact, for us to do the kinds of works to which God has called us, we really need to get into the game. And so each of us has a role to play, and when we play that role, we can make a difference. And so the first thing that I want us to see comes out of verse 12 primarily, but we'll pick up a couple of names from verse 13 as well. Look with me there, if you will. Paul says, "And I send when I send Artemis or Tychicus to you," right? So it is a when. They're not there. They're not on Crete. They're not with Titus yet. But Paul is sending 2 more of his faithful co-laborers to Crete to free Titus up for something, right? And so he goes on and he says, and when I send either of these 2 men to you, he says, the NASB says, make every effort to come to me at Nicopolis. Now, Nicopolis, there are actually, 7 or 8 different cities in the Roman world at that time called Nicopolis because it means victory city. And every time a general or somebody would win a war and they would establish Roman rule in that city, it could get named Victory City. But the one that he is probably talking about is here on this map. And so I want you to see. So here's Crete. This is where Titus is. This is where Paul is writing to Titus. Titus is responsible for ministering to the leaders on the island, appointing elders, etc. And then this is Nicopolis here, which is part of Greece, and it is right across the ocean from what? Italy and Rome, and it's a 200-mile jog straight up the main highway from here across to Rome. And so what's so interesting is just this map reminds us of what's going on at this time. and the endeavor that Paul and Titus and all the men mentioned in this text, the thing in which all of them are involved is what? The outgoing of the good news of Messiah from Jerusalem to Judea and Samaria and to the outermost parts of the world. And they are pouring out their lives to see more and more people, Jews and Gentiles, come to a living faith in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob through his Son, King Messiah. And so that's what they're involved in. And so I just wanted to share this map with you because I felt like it was helpful to see, because we don't, it's like we talk about these cities and they have no meaning to us because we don't know where they are. But when we see them in their context, we realize, oh, this is all part of God's great global plan. And so Paul wants Titus to leave Crete to join him. Paul wants Titus to join him in ministry, whether there's some specific need that Titus is able to fill that others are not, we don't know. But he's going to send Artemas, who we know nothing about, or Tychicus, who has a long, faithful career. And you can find Tychicus named in a number of different places in the New Covenant Scriptures, and it's very likely that he is one of the men who actually delivered letters to places like Ephesus and things like that, Paul's letters to the different cities. And so the map, again, reminds us of the global task in which Paul and these men are involved. And if we go on in the text, he says, make every effort, and that's the imperative there. Make every effort, or do your best. So there's effort here, right? He's commanding Titus to be energized to do whatever he has to do to finish the task of appointing elders in every city, so that when Tychicus or Artemas show up, he is free to leave so he can join Paul. And so he wants him to get into the game by what? By going. By going. He says, for I have decided to spend the winter there. Just so if you're not aware of this already, the Mediterranean Sea in ancient times was basically closed down all winter. And as you could see on that map, travel from where Titus was to where Paul was to where they wanted to go required, for the most part, sea travel. And so Paul is hunkered down. He's going to stay in one place for the winter rather than risk another shipwreck on the Mediterranean. But he goes on. Look with me at verse 13 rather. I want to make this point. He mentions Zenos the lawyer, and we don't know if he was an expert in the Mosaic law or if he was an expert in Roman law. And you can imagine if he was an expert in Roman law, how that would have been helpful to Paul under his circumstances late in his career. And then, of course, we know a lot about Apollos, rather. If you haven't read up on him, I would encourage you to go to Acts chapter 18, verses 24 to 28, where Apollos is met by, yes, thank you. Priscilla and Aquila meet him there. And so apparently Apollos is this great orator. He is from Egypt. He's an Egyptian Jew, and he is preaching the good news, but he doesn't understand the difference between the baptism of John and the baptism in Yeshua's name. And so this couple take him aside, and they teach him more accurately, and he goes to work, and he is confuting and confounding the people around him who are disagreeing with the good news by opening the scriptures and arguing from the text. And so we read about Apollos in a number of different places. But this is my point. My point is this, is that some of us need to get in the game by what? Going. By going. Now, for the younger people in our congregation, I want to challenge you. Are you praying? Are you saying, Lord, might you want me to invest my life in sharing the good news? Do you want me to prepare myself to be able to vocationally take the good news to places where it has not been sent yet, or to go to places where the good news is beginning to take root and to disciple people and teach people and help it spread that way? Or perhaps, like me, you're at the end of your career in the world, doing hard work, earning a living, taking care of your family, and you're ready to retire. Have you prayed and say, Lord, in my retirement, with my extra time, is there some way in which you would like me to be investing my life for the sake of the outgoing of the gospel? It could mean a short-term missions trip. It could mean you have more time to develop relationships with the people the Olive Tree congregation supports so that you can pray for them more regularly or be in touch with them or go visit them. Or when they are home here on home assignment, you can welcome them into your home and begin to invest in them in that way. And so there's this idea of going, that we need to get in the game by going. And it doesn't need to be a whole lifelong kind of career thing either, does it? Many of us have neighbors who don't know the Lord. And the question is, are we willing to go in order to minister to them, to get to know them, to find and make opportunities to share Messiah's good news with them? And so the first thing I want us to see is in where he says, do your best or make every effort to come to me. This whole idea that it takes energy, it takes intentionality, it takes planning, it takes prayer. But some of us, God is going to call to get into the game by going. And then the next thing I want us to see comes out of verses 13 and 14. He says this. He says, diligently help Zenas the lawyer and Apollos on their way so that nothing is lacking for them. And so, again, we don't know a lot about Zenas, but we do know a lot about Apollos. And apparently, where are they? They're either there in Crete, right, with Titus at this time, or they are going to be arriving shortly, and Paul wants Titus to do what? To help them on their way. To help them on their way. And it's so interesting that it says in the NASB, it says, diligently help Zenas, the lawyer, and Apollos on their way. Another way to translate that would simply be to say, speed Zenas, the lawyer, and Apollos on their way so that nothing is lacking for them. And so what does that mean? It means, look, make sure these two men who are serving the Lord in this grand program of bringing the light of the world to a place that's dark, make sure that you are giving them the resources that they need to do what they have been called to do quickly. So they don't have to stay and work, perhaps. Maybe they were like Paul. They were bivocational, and they needed money for a voyage, or they needed money for food, or needed to make arrangements to get from point A to point B. And so he is saying to Titus, he's saying, speed them along. Get involved. Get into the game. Make sure they have their needs met so that they can do what God has called them to do. And it's one of the things I love about the Olive Tree congregation is we have a wonderful global outreach team, and we have a great global outreach ministry where we are supporting and encouraging and equipping and speeding on their way people who have been called by the Lord to serve him vocationally in sharing the gospel and doing discipleship. Isn't that a wonderful thing? And so not only some of us are going to get into the game by going, but others of us, and perhaps most of us, are going to get into the game by what? By sending. By sending. And so we're going to speed them on their way by what? First and foremost, prayer. Right? And then by giving. By giving. And I love the fact that at the Olive Tree congregation, there's a certain percentage of our budget that is set aside every year for missions, for outreach of this kind, for speeding people on the way. And that percentage grows a little bit from year to year, so that more and more of our budget is investing in speeding people on their way. And so what's your role in that? Maybe you're a good communicator and you can help us know what's going on in the lives of the people we support, so that we can be praying for them more knowledgeably and consistently. We can be working together when there's a need on the field to help meet that need. Because some of the places in which people are serving, it's not so easy to get the things that you need. The old joke about the brand new missionary gets off the plane in Mexico, in rural Mexico, and the senior missionary who's been there for years picks him up and says, "Just tell me what you need and I'll tell you how to get along without it." Right? And so I'll give you an example. We are supporting, we are helping send as a congregation Lee and Regina, who are in Brazil, right? And so they have a life and they have finances and they have banking and responsibilities that are still here in the United States. And so every once in a while, Lee will message me and say, "Hey, there's a new credit card arriving in the mail for Regina, and it's coming to your house. Would you please take a picture of that and send it to me so I have all the information on the card? Or a check is going to come. Would you please take a picture of that so I can deposit it remotely?" And it's just a little thing like that. But the question is, are you open to the Lord, saying, "Lord, how can I get in the game? I'm here, I have these gifts, these talents that you've given me. How can I use those to further the sharing of the good news in this dark world? How can I do those kinds of good works?" And then he finishes up in verse 14. He says this. He says, I'm sorry, I left this out. I should have spoken about this before I made the applications I just made. He says, "Our people must learn to engage in good deeds to meet pressing or necessary needs so that they will not be unfruitful." You get that? He's saying, "Look, I want you to come to me when these guys take your place, and I want you to speed these guys on their way in the ministry to which God is calling them, because this is a great opportunity for all of our people, for the whole church, for every believer in Messiah there on Crete, to learn to engage in good deeds so they won't be without fruit." The fruit of what? The fruit of the gospel. The fruit of people coming to a saving knowledge of Yeshua, because we have been willing to be sent, or we have been supportive in sending. And so he wants us to learn good deeds, good works, the very things that this book is about, this letter is about, the works to which God has called us and for which he has saved us through faith in the Messiah. So then, look with me at the last verse, 15. So not only get into the game by going, get into the game by sending. This last verse tells us that we get into the game by God's grace. Because I don't know about you, but when I hear a message like this, I hear a lot of condemnation, or I receive it as condemnation, because I always feel like, well, I'm just not doing enough. Or I don't think I can. And that's one of the reasons I love the illustration I used at the beginning of this very shy, retiring locker room attendant. Because he doubted himself. He doubted what was in him. And he finally had to come to grips with it, that he could do what he was told he could do. And we have to come to the same place. If you want to go, right? If you want to get into the game by going, there's one thing you need to understand about your ability to go. It is not in you. It is not in you. It is in God. It is in Messiah. It is by his grace. And that's what he finishes with. He says, all who are with me greet you. And when you look up this word greet in other letters, for instance, in Thessalonians, he says, greet one another with a holy kiss. And so when he talks about all who are with me greet you and greet those who love us in the faith, he's elevating this idea of greeting. And he's saying, we are a family. Do you know that the early Christians were accused of, what were they accused of because they called each other brother and sister? Incest, thank you. See, that's why I love Joel sitting here in the front row. Of incest. Why? Because they greeted one another with such intimacy, with a holy kiss, in a way the rest of society did not greet one another. And he is saying, remember that we are all part of one family. And if you'll allow me, that we are all part of one team. There is only one team, and it is Team Yeshua. And if you are his disciple, his follower, you are on Team Yeshua. And there is only one game, and the game is bringing the good news to the world that so desperately needs it. And when we greet one another, no matter whether we're Jewish or Gentile, or we're rich or we're poor, or we're slave or we're free, or whether we grew up in an urban setting or whether we grew up in a suburban or a rural setting, whether we came to faith living literally in the woods somewhere, or whether we grew up in a high-rise, it does not matter. We are all on the same team, all part of the same family. And when we greet one another in this way, we are reminded of that. But what binds us together is the grace of God, is it not? That's how we entered the family. That's how we become part of Messiah's body. That is how we become part of his team, if you will. And Paul finishes in the same way he started at the beginning of this letter in verse 4 of chapter 1. He finishes here with, grace be with you all. The grace that brings salvation. The grace that brings justification, being declared right in God's sight. The grace that draws you and brings you into a saving relationship with the Messiah is the same grace that you have to go, to get into the game by going, or get into the game by sending. It's God in us. It's his Spirit, his power that enables us to play with our, to play our hearts out, if you will, to get into the game and to give everything for the sake of sharing the good news. It's not up to us. It's not our power. It's not your wisdom. It's not my wisdom. It's his wisdom, and it comes to us by his grace. And so, what's the final word on do good? Get into the game. Get into the game. God has saved you because he wants to use you for Messiah's glory as the good news goes out. Let's pray. Father, thank you so much for your word. Thank you for this closing farewell that Paul signs off with in his letter to Titus. And what a great reminder it is of this amazing I'm going to use the word thing, and this amazing program that you have started, that you started from eternity past, and to which you call every believer to be involved. So, Lord, we thank you that you have created us and that you have given us in Messiah and by your Spirit everything we need, and that you have created us to create a people for yourself who are zealous for good deeds, especially the good deed of sharing the good news. So, Lord, give us the heart, give us a vision, help us to get our minds out of all of the petty stuff that is so huge around us, and get our eyes and get our hearts on what counts for eternity, what's really worth living for, what's really worth dying for. Lord, that we might bring you glory, that we might do the works for which you have saved us. We ask this confidently in Yeshua's name. Amen.